not because of the American people. It's at risk because of us. We ought to change that. I yield the floor. I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
President, I have unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call and speak up for 7 minutes as if in order of business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the courtesies of the senator on the floor that's managing the bill from Washington State, and I thank her for allowing me to make these brief remarks about one of the nominees of President Obama, someone that we will be confirming, hopefully, in the next short period of time. I wanted to come to the floor to give my strong and unequivocal support to Alejandro Mayorkas as the Deputy Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security. Before I talk about his many extraordinary qualifications for this job, let me say that it has been very disappointing to me and very concerning to me that so many high-level leadership positions in this particular department have gone unfilled for so long. It's been 6 months since Secretary Janet Napolitano stepped down, having given notice of her departure after serving with such distinction and contributing so much to the strengthening of that agency. All agencies of the federal government are important, and their advocacy groups could argue, but I think everyone understands the real significance of the Department of Homeland Security. It's a relatively new agency, only 10 years old, or department, but it plays a key role in the security of our homeland. And because it's new, it is still struggling with how to coordinate and unite all of its internal parts and coordinate effectively with the Department of Defense. It's got new and emerging technological challenges that are extremely demanding. The cyber attack that's happening daily and in growing threat to us is a very important part of their mission. And may I remind the senators here that immigration, border control, border security is right in the middle of the mission of this department. So if we want to have strong immigration policies and smart immigration policies and secure borders and smart fences, we better get somebody that's experienced and smart to run the operation. And that's why I'm here to support Ali Mayorkas, who has been the Director of Immigration for the last several years, has received very many compliments from both Republicans and Democrats in that role as our Chief Immigration Officer, has worked to secure the border, made tremendous improvements with the resources that have been quite significant that we have provided to strengthen the border. He brings tremendous experience as having run one of the most significant agencies within the department. But it doesn't, so today we have a chance to start filling the leadership vacuum at the Department of Homeland Security, not only with visionary leaders like Ali Mayorkas, but with leaders that have practical, on-the-hands experience running the important parts of this department. As I mentioned, he's the current Director of U.S. and Citizenship Service, which is really how I got to meet him and to know him and to work with him in such a close fashion. Many of my colleagues know that I have the responsibility and privilege of informally heading up our Senate Adoption Caucus and do a great deal, well, some international travel, helping strengthen child welfare work around the world, as well as, of course, in Louisiana and here domestically in the United States. We ran into a significant problem several years ago, which we're still trying to unwind, when Guatemala closed adoptions, and our own State Department was a partner in that closure. There might have been some good reasons for closure. The problem was that in the middle of that, there were 900 American families from every state in the Union that were caught, were not placed on any transition list, were given no support, virtually no support from either our State Department or the country of Guatemala. So some of us stepped in with partners at the State Department and others to see what we could do to help. And it's been a long, hard road for many of these parents and children that have now been stuck in orphanages, in group homes. No longer are they infants. Some of them are 8 years old. They've been waiting 6 years for their adoption to be finalized. Some of them are 15. Well, amidst all of the work that Ali Mayorkas had to do on immigration and so many conflicting pressures, he took the time out to give leadership and voice and help to the powerless. And that speaks a lot to me, and it should to the members of our coalition, which is very broad, completely not partisan, when a very important person with a lot of power steps out of their steps out of that comfort zone and helps people that have no lobbyists, no power, and without his help, we would not be making the progress we are. So that is one example that proves to me that he's the kind of leader we need more of, not less of, here in Washington. And I have full confidence that based on my knowledge of his experience running immigration, my personal knowledge of his character and his integrity and his tremendous ability in terms of diplomacy and negotiating, which I got to witness firsthand working with many high-level government officials from outside of our own government, I am confident that he has the skills to negotiate within this agency to bring everyone to common cause, common vision, and a common plan to move this very important department forward. Prior to his directorship as immigration director for the United States, he served for a good bit of time as a U.S. attorney, prosecuting criminal and white-collar crime and gang violence in California. He is known very well to the two senators from California. I think it was Senator Feinstein that had recommended him to that position. She has testified on his behalf and has submitted statements to the record. Both senators from California can also vouch for his almost, flawless record of service. He's been confirmed by the Senate of the United States already twice. And yet, unfortunately, there were, some, I think, political concerns that are not valid that held him up. So we have moved him forward. He's gotten a strong vote from the members of our committee that know him well and understand his high level of integrity and his proven record of service to the people of the United States. So I am pleased to add the rest of this statement to the record in writing. It is more comprehensive than just these brief words, but again, I want to urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to take a strong look at this nominee, understand he's been confirmed twice before. He is an outstanding, unblemished prosecutor of crime. He would be a perfect person with his background and experience to serve as the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and I frankly think he's one of the most qualified people that I've seen come through here. So, Madam President, thank you. I yield the floor. I don't see any other senator wanting to speak at this moment, so I would simply suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Madam President, I would ask to dispense with the calling of the quorum.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 259S1797, a bill to extend unemployment insurance benefits for 1 year, that the bill be read a third time and passed, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Madam President,
The Republican whip.
reserving the right to object, Madam President, it's unfortunate the Senate schedule is completely full of pending cloture motions on controversial or completely non-urgent nominations. I would ask if the Senator would consider amending his request to withdraw all of the pending cloture motions on executive nominations, and that the Senate would proceed immediately to consideration of S-1797, the unemployment insurance extension, and that the majority leader and that the minority leader would be recognized to offer amendments in an alternating fashion so that these important issues can be considered this week. I'd ask the Senator to consider amending his request and reserve my right to object.
Does the Senator so amend his request?
I will not amend the request. I respect the Senator's point, but I will not amend the request. I'm here simply to ask for the unanimous consent as I presented it.
Is there objection to the original request?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Thank you very much. Let me say I appreciate the Senator from Texas coming here, engaging, and I appreciate the fact that he is making a point, but I am trying to make a point which I think is very compelling. Within a few days, December 28th, 1.3 million Americans will lose their extended federal unemployment insurance benefits. It'll be a tremendous trauma to those families, and it'll be a huge impact to our economy going forward. I have renewed my request for a full 1-year extension, and it has been objected to, and I recognize that. I believe it's urgent that we do that. I also have been working closely with my Republican colleague, Senator Heller, on a bipartisan basis to introduce a request to extend these benefits for 3 months, giving us the opportunity to go and take a more deliberate and careful review of the program, and also to provide for a mechanism to extend the benefits for a full year. And I'm very pleased that we're beginning to build bipartisan support for this initiative for at least 3 months. And it does reflect the fact that my colleagues all across the country are recognizing the huge impacts of this loss of benefits. This is not a problem that is restricted to a particular area of the country. Nevada is the highest state in terms of unemployment numbers. Rhode Island trails behind, and not by much. We're over 9%. But you have states that are across this country, throughout the country. Michigan at 9%, Illinois at 8.9%, Kentucky at 8.4%, Georgia at 8.1%, Arizona at 8.2%. These are states that have significant issues with respect to unemployment and need the continuation of this program to protect their families and also to provide stimulus for their local economies. We have, at this point, in many of these places, 2 unemployed workers for every available job. So this is not just a question of the jobs are there, just go get it. The job's not there. And also we recognize, and I think we all recognize, the skill sets that are increasingly in demand are some of the skill sets that mature workers, people who've been working for 20 years, who've been every day of their life going to the office, or going to the mill, going to the plant. Now they're competing with 20-year-olds who have sophisticated information technology skills and other skills in a climate where manufacturing is becoming sophisticated. Every sort of enterprise seems to be much more sophisticated and demanding more level of skills than years ago. So this is a very difficult time, and I believe in this difficult period of time we need to extend these benefits. There is extensive research on unemployment insurance and labor markets that also supports the point that people who are on unemployment insurance want to go back to work. It's a very sort of pragmatic insight. In Rhode Island, for example, average benefits about $350 a week. For most workers, that is a fraction of what they were gaining in their job. They would love to be called back to work. They would love to find a job that fits their skills, that is close to the pay they had or maybe less. But no one is socking away a lot of money on their UI benefits. And indeed, a recent report by the White House Council on Economic Advisors looks at the economic trade-offs that are being faced. And in their words, in choosing the optimal unemployment insurance policy, policymakers must weigh competing costs and benefits. On the one hand, some argue that extended benefits may dull the incentives for unemployed workers to exert effort to search for another job, leading to increased unemployment, the so-called moral hazard effect. But on the other hand, providing benefits gives families incomes that can, in the limited, keep them from poverty, and more generally help them to finance a longer job search that might ultimately result in a job better matching their talents, resulting in higher overall labor market productivity. These are, I think, important aspects that have to be considered. And I think the consensus of many economists is that this program is not only necessary and essential, but it also does not significantly inhibit the willingness, the ability, the desire of people to get back to work. Raj Shetty, who is an economist who's studied these issues, he's looked at these trade-offs for over 20 years, concludes, nearly a dozen economic studies have analyzed this question by comparing unemployment rates in states that have extended unemployment benefits with those in states that do not. These studies have uniformly found that a 10-week extension in unemployment benefits raises the average amount of time people spend out of work by at most 1 week. This simple, unassailable finding implies that policymakers can extend unemployment benefits to provide assistance to those out of work without substantially increasing unemployment rates. And that is the conclusion of someone who's been looking at this issue for many, many, many years. Once again, from the Council of Economic Advisors report, finally, while economists have found only small disincentive effects of UI extensions, recent research shows that the effect of UI on job search behavior is even smaller in recessions as the moral hazard effect shrinks when jobs are scarce. Let's get back to common sense. There are 2 workers for every job. The benefits that they receive are a fraction of what they would get in the workplace. They want to get into the workplace. The job's not there. Frankly, we haven't done enough, I would suggest, to put those jobs in place. We got to do more. But in the interim, we have to make sure these families have some benefits and some protection. Now, I'm quite willing to work with my colleagues if there are changes that should be made, could be made, but we're facing this deadline. And unless we move, and I'm disappointed we haven't moved today, 1.3 million people on December 28th lose their benefits. The checks will start going out, will cease going out the following week, and our economy will take a hit next year of 200,000 jobs, about 0.2% growth, shrinkage. We can avoid that by moving today or moving tomorrow, certainly moving as soon as we get back to make sure that these benefits are in place. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor. Quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President.
The senator from New Hampshire.
Madam President, I would ask that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Yesterday I came to the Senate floor to discuss 2 amendments that I had filed to the budget agreement that would have addressed, I think, an egregious part of this agreement, which is the cuts to military retiree benefits. In particular, I think the most egregious part of it is those who have been disabled. We've all been to Walter Reed and seen and met our brave heroes, some who have lost limbs, serving our country in Afghanistan and Iraq, and yet in this agreement we are cutting their cost of living increases for the retirement that they earned on behalf of our country. And so yesterday I came to the floor to talk about what I think is an appalling part of this budget agreement, but also to say that why can't we amend the budget agreement and fix this now? And I offered two possibilities of how we would do that, two amendments that I filed on this. I'm sure others can find in the trillions of dollars CBO has said we're going to spend over the next 10 years, $47 trillion. We can't find $6 billion rather than taking it from our military retirees. But today I also come, and what happened yesterday on the floor is that there was a motion to take down the tree so that we could actually amend this and fix provisions like that, and it was voted down. So now we have no ability to amend this budget agreement, and so I can't bring the amendments I talked about yesterday to help our military retirees and ensure that they don't get singled out in this agreement, which I think is appalling and wrong. But I also can't bring an amendment that I also filed that addresses an issue that's very important to the state of New Hampshire. And that agreement is an objection I have to a particular provision in the budget agreement that would make it easier for the Senate to pass legislation requiring online retailers to become the tax collectors for the states and the rest of the nation. The so-called Marketplace Fairness Act that the Senate passed earlier this year, within this budget agreement, there is what's called a reserve fund that allows the chairman of the Budget Committee to bypass certain procedural limitations that are normally allowed and procedural objections you have and all members have to these types of legislation, budgetary objections, and these procedural objections are waived when these types of reserve funds are passed. And this provision, which I fought on the Senate floor, on the Senate budget, it did eventually get passed, is included in this agreement, even though since this body has passed the Marketplace Fairness Act, the House has refused to take it up. The House has wisely found that there are major objections to this piece of legislation, which would require businesses, many of these businesses around the country that we see thriving on the Internet, to become the tax collectors for the rest of the nation. In fact, my state of New Hampshire does not have a sales tax, and what it would require is that my businesses in New Hampshire, online businesses that have written to me, it would place tremendous burdens on them. They would have to become the tax collectors for nearly 10,000 tax jurisdictions in this country, trampling on New Hampshire's choice not to have a sales tax, and also, I think, putting a tremendous burden on businesses to do the jobs of the states in becoming tax collectors for the rest of the nation. This legislation is bad for the economy, and I think it's bad for businesses, and particularly businesses in my home state of New Hampshire. And so I object to the provision, the reserve fund that is in this budget, and I have filed a motion, an amendment that would strike that provision. But again, no amendments are going to be heard on this budget agreement because the majority leader has filled the tree and said there will be no amendments heard, no matter what the merits of the amendment, no matter how important the amendments are, including amendments that I talked about that impact and help address the real egregious provision in here that impacts our military retirees. And this is just another example, I think, on an issue that's very important to the state of New Hampshire, where I allowed to bring my amendment forward. I would have again expressed my opposition to this reserve fund that is within this budget that is objectionable, that makes it easier to pass future legislation, a future version of the Marketplace Fairness Act that will put a tremendous burden on businesses in New Hampshire, and it's wrong to have online businesses become the tax collectors for the nation. So, Madam President, I believe we should be allowed to amend this budget agreement, to vote on these amendments, and particularly on issues that are important to our men and women in uniform, as I've described. But not only that, this issue on the remote collection of sales taxes by businesses throughout the country, online businesses, is a very important issue to the state of New Hampshire, which does not have a sales tax, but not just the state of New Hampshire, to online businesses across the country who do not and should not have to be the tax collectors for states throughout the nation. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor. The quorum call be initiated again.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The pending business in the Senate is the federal budget. A vote to approve the bipartisan measures expected this afternoon at about 4:30 Eastern. Also, you've heard senators making remarks about the defense programs and policy bill. Votes on that expected before the end of the week, probably today. The Associated Press has a story about it. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said today that his Democratic counterpart is barring any GOP changes to pending defense legislation because, quote, he can't stomach a vote on Iran sanctions. In a blistering speech on the Senate floor, McConnell railed against Democratic leader Harry Reid for changing Senate rules to limit the GOP's ability to filibuster and complained that Senator Reid was jamming a comprehensive $632.8 billion bill through the Senate without allowing any amendments. Senator Reid insists that he has no other choice to counter GOP delaying tactics on nominations and legislation, including the defense policy bill, which attracted some 500 amendments before Thanksgiving. Again, that test vote to move ahead on the bill slated for today. Or earlier today on the Senate floor, Arizona Senator John McCain and Senate Budget Committee Chair Patty Murray came to the floor in support of the budget agreement. Senator McCain, however, is concerned about its cuts to the military.
I would say to my friend, the chairperson of the Budget Committee that has done extremely hard work on the budget agreement, are you aware, could I ask, that under the Simpson-Bowles plan, which was embraced by...
Without objection.
Madam President, I want to talk about some solutions to our health care problems that have been out there for a while, and every time I hear someone say there were no alternatives to the Affordable Care Act, there were no alternatives to what the President wanted to do. In fact, I heard the President say that multiple times last week, though it may have been multiple reportings of him saying it at the same time, but there's no question he said it, that there were no ideas out there except his ideas. And that's just not accurate. And we had and still have the best health care system in the world, but it wasn't perfect. Didn't mean it couldn't have been improved, didn't mean there weren't ways to create greater access for those of us who have held concerns from the very first about the proposals that we're now seeing play out in front of American families and before the American people, before individuals that thought they could get insurance that didn't, before individuals that had insurance at work that are beginning to lose it. When we see that play out and hear, well, this was the only idea out there, not the only idea at all. And some of the things, at the time I was in the the House of Representatives and proposed these on the House, and they were not just bills that we filed and didn't talk about. In fact, a lot of this was covered very widely. Even on occasion, we had to have Republican-only hearings because the other side didn't want to talk about these issues. They just wanted to talk about one way to solve these problems that I think is more and more clear may not be solving the problems nearly as well as they would have hoped for. You know, there are a number of things that could have created more access to the good health care system we had, solved problems that individuals had. Bills that I introduced, that I was either the principal sponsor of or the co-sponsor of, one of those would have been to allow small businesses to band together in either what you want to call small business health plans or association health plans, where people who had a common purpose could come together and figure out, as actually in our state we allowed people to do in the state of Missouri, to figure out, to have these associated health plans so your small group of 5 or 10 or 15 people didn't become the universe of the group you were trying to insure, but you'd have truly access to small business health plans. Now, I'll be truthful, the insurance companies, for whatever reason, never liked that idea very well, but association health plans or small business health plans were one of the things. In fact, I co-sponsored that bill with Congressman Sam Johnson. It was House Resolution 2607. If anybody wants to look back and see just how much we talked about this issue and how we dealt with it. Another issue, every time the President's health care plan comes up, well, what about the coverage for young adults? I was the only person in the House, as I recall, and I've said this a number of times, never been challenged, that actually filed the bill that said let's let people stay on their family insurance policies longer. There are those out there since who have said, well, that's just, that expanded that too much. It was a slacker provision. It wasn't anything like that. It was an effort to take the most uninsured group in America, young, healthy people, and let them stay on their parents' health care. It was an effort to get, I think the number we talked about was around 3 million people have access to policies that they didn't have access to at some level. In virtually every state, you could stay on your family policy till you were 21. In Missouri, I think the number was 23. The proposal I made was, well, let's add 2 years to that and do it for the whole country. Let's say 25. Well, the President said in the Affordable Health Care Act 26. I don't think I would have had a big fight about whether my bill that said let's let people be insured on their family policy till they're 25 was expanded to 26. I don't think that makes that uniquely the President's idea, and that was House Resolution. That was a bill that I sponsored, and it would have helped young workers, college students. These are young, healthy people generally, and it wouldn't have added much, and I think is not adding much to insurance cost for families or those who are otherwise insured. And the idea that somehow we couldn't do that, every time this topic comes up, there's somebody who will jump up and say, well, you mean you want to take people who are now on their family policy and who are under 26 and take them off the family policy? All you've got to do to prevent that is pass one piece of legislation that may have been 40 words long. May have been 40 words long, may have been a couple of pages. I know of all the ideas I introduced, the biggest one was 75 pages long. It wasn't a 2,700-page health care bill. It was the biggest of all the bills I introduced was 75 pages long. You could have done one of them or you could have done all of them, and they would have worked. Some of these are on this chart right here. Encourage wellness programs, reform coverage for pre-existing conditions. We had high-risk pools that were working. There was a way to expand those high-risk pools so they would work better. And we proposed that in legislation. I was here on the floor the other day and talked about a young man in Missouri who's 20 now, who's had an illness since he was 18 months old. He gets fluid on his brain. He had his first surgery at 18 months old. He went from his family policy to the high-risk pool, which worked pretty well for him for a number of years and is working right now. But December 31, the high-risk pool goes away. And he can't get access to the doctors he's used his entire life on any policy available to him. So we've eliminated the policy he had that was serving him well and the doctor's group he'd had his entire life. We've eliminated that by eliminating the high-risk pool, and we put him in a situation where neither the doctor or now, was that an improvement or not? Absolutely not. Could the high-risk pools have been expanded? Were there ways to do that? There absolutely were, and those were proposed. Medical liability reform was one of the things that we could have done and proposed, and in fact, even in the last Congress, I introduced introduced in the Senate the Help Efficient, Accessible, Low-Cost, Timely Health Care Act with Senate Bill 1099, but very much like legislation that was available and could have become part of health care reform in 2009. The safety net to be sure that emergency room physicians have particular protections on liability because they don't have any choice but to treat people. That's another bill I introduced this year that was very much in line with what we were talking about just a few years ago. Insurance flexibility. 111th Congress, I co-sponsored H.R. 3824, the Expanded Health Insurance Options Act, which just allowed people to buy across state lines through regional compacts, allowed states, if they wanted to form compacts that they could be part of, that again would have been part of this solution. Reform coverage for pre-existing conditions, encourage wellness programs. This is something that could make a big difference, and it's something that we could have thought of ways and did think of ways to encourage. The House Resolution 4038, the Common Sense Health Reform Act, Representative Camp and I introduced that, would have achieved this goal of looking for new and better ways to encourage wellness programs. Now, I'm not done yet, Mr. President, but I will tell you, every time the President steps up or anybody else does and says there were no other ideas, that's just not true. There were other ideas that I believed then and believe now would work better, and every day as the Affordable Care Act becomes more and more available to us, I'm more and more convinced there were better solutions, and I'm absolutely offended by this constant discussion that there were no other ideas. Prevent rescissions. We had talked about legislation at the time that would have prevented canceling policies or prevented setting caps after somebody got sick. That doesn't take an entire government overwhelming the insurance marketplace to say that here are two things you can't do. The Common Sense Health Care Reform and Accountability Act would have helped achieve that goal. Prevent limits on coverage. Encourage health savings accounts. Encourage people to have a little of their money that is available to them to use for health care expenses. I'll tell you what I'm seeing happen now is so many people are now looking at policies that have these huge deductibles. For most families, it's not like having a policy at all. If you've got a policy like the one I was talking about on the floor the other day, reporting from a Missouri family where they were paying $1,100 a month for insurance and they had a $12,000 deductible. Now, is that really insurance? For most families, is that really insurance? $24,000 out of your pocket before your insurance pays anything. But it met all the better coverage, supposedly, that the President says we now have. It met all those standards. It could be made available, but it had deductibility, as many of these policies do. We're going to find all this out quickly. You know, the only thing worse than the website not working may be the website working. Because when the website begins to work, people are we're going to have the facts. There's no reason to argue about the facts. The President continues to say that people are going to have better coverage for less money, and we're going to know in the next 90 days or so just how true that is. I'm sure that some people are going to find better coverage for less money. I'm equally sure that most people are not going to find that. So health savings accounts, increased transparency. Now, this is an idea that's actually in the bill, but they haven't pursued it, where you tell health care providers they have to give more information about what they charge and what their results are. This act passed, what, 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, says right there in the law that they can require providers to do that, but nobody has passed that rule or regulation yet. This would have been something that would have helped. Most of the time you go to the hospital, particularly if it's something you've scheduled, you're in the car on the way to the hospital knowing who gets the better results or who gets the same results for the lower price would be really helpful information for most Americans and most American families to have. And reform tax treatment. This was another idea that we talked about widely. If you buy your insurance on your own or you get your insurance at work, there needs to be equity in that tax treatment. Whether you cap what you can get at work and allow that same tax credit if you buy it as an individual, there are lots of ways to do this. The point is, Mr. President, there were lots of ideas out there. There were lots of ideas out there. I am persuaded that these ideas right here, which would have cost taxpayers virtually nothing, would have had minimal impact on the cost of insurance, but would have had a lot of impact on a bigger marketplace. More choices, not fewer choices, would have been a better way to go. There were ideas out there. At some point, we may very well need to return to these ideas because at some point we may decide that the course we're on is unworkable. Now, Americans shouldn't look at that and think, oh, that means my health care, the old system, we have to go back to the old system unimproved. There are plenty of ways to improve access to the best health care system in the world. Diminishing that health care system is not one of those ways. And, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to congratulate the senator from Missouri for his comments. Sometimes I think Republican senators especially should begin and end every speech with an answer to the question, what would you do if you were in charge? And the senator from Missouri has said that very, very eloquently. And it's not the first time it's been said on this floor. He mentioned the law was passed 3.5 years ago. We counted it up one time. We mentioned 173 different times on this floor the Republican step-by-step proposal for a different approach to health care in this country. We said, don't expect Senator McConnell or any other Republican to come in here with a wheelbarrow with a 3,000-page Republican bill. We don't believe in that. We believe in a different direction, a different approach. We don't believe we're wise enough in Washington to write 3,000 pages of rules to govern every aspect of our health care system in America that takes 18 or 19% of the economy. We live in the iPhone age when we want to increase the personal freedom of Americans to live longer and better and safer and healthier, and we want people to be able to do these things for themselves. We want to increase choice and competition and in that way lower costs, and if we lower costs, then more people can afford to buy insurance. That's the real way to expand health care insurance in America. Make it more affordable. Make it so people can afford it. So I'm beginning these short remarks with a salute to the senator from Missouri for talking about what we would do if we were in charge. And I'm going to end in that way as well. Well, for the last couple of months, we've heard countless stories from constituents who are losing the health plans they purchased on individual markets. According to America's health insurance plans, there are 19 million Americans in individual markets. The Obama administration knew that in 2010 when the rules it wrote for the health plans said that 47 to 60% of these policies couldn't be legally offered by Obamacare by 2014. Nevertheless, the president still said if you like your health care, you can keep it. But now we know that wasn't true. According to news reports collected by my staff, at least 5 million Americans, including 82,000 Tennesseans, will lose their individual plan starting January 1st. That's an unwelcome Christmas present for those 82,000 Tennesseans. 16,000 Tennesseans are losing their Cover Tennessee plans. These are people who especially need help. 66,000 Tennesseans will lose their Blue Cross Blue Shield Tennessee coverage. I heard from a woman named Emily in Middle Tennessee. She's 39 years of age. She has lupus. She wrote, "I can't keep my current plan because it doesn't meet the Obamacare standards. It's been a lifeline for me. With the discontinuation of Cover 10, I'm being forced to purchase a plan on the exchange." Emily writes, "My insurance premiums alone will increase a staggering 410%. My out-of-pocket expense will increase by more than $6,000 a year. Please help me." This includes subsidies, she said. "Please help me understand how this is affordable." Unfortunately, she's not the only one. Emily's not the only one experiencing rate shock. Millions of Americans are losing their insurance. They're being forced to buy new plans, many of them, with higher premiums, deductibles, and co-insurance. According to data from the Department of Health and Human Services, Tennesseans can expect to pay up to 3 times more on the exchanges being set up under Obamacare for the health insurance they now have. In 2013, a 27-year-old man in Memphis can buy a private insurance plan for as low as $41 a month. On the exchange, the lowest state average is $119 a month, a 190% increase. Today, a 27-year-old woman in Nashville can also buy a plan for as low as $58 a month. On the exchange, the lowest price plan in Nashville is $114 a month, a 97% increase. Even with that tax subsidy, if she made $25,000 a year, say, the plan would be $104 a month, almost twice what she could pay today if the $58 plan was all she felt she needed. Today, women in Nashville can choose from 30 insurance plans that cost less than the administration says insurance plans on the exchange will cost, even with the new tax subsidy. In Nashville, 105 insurance plans offered today will not be available in the exchange. According to Health Pocket Incorporated, a consumer-oriented health research firm, the average individual deductible for a bronze plan on the federally run exchange is $5,081 a year. This is 42% more than the average deductible of $3,500 for an individually purchased plan in 2013. And according to Deloitte, that is 348% more than $1,135 average deductible for an employer health plan in 2013. These are a lot of numbers, Mr. President, but Americans, millions of them, are getting familiar with these numbers because this has gone from being political to being very personal. According to Avalier Health, 90% of bronze plans require patients to pay 40% of the cost of their Tier 3 and 4 drugs out of their own pockets, compared with 29% of employer-sponsored plans that most Americans currently use. Most silver plans also require patients to pay 40%. For cancer patients and those with chronic illnesses, this kind of cost sharing could mean they will pay thousands of dollars out of pocket or go without the drugs they need to stay healthy. Americans had to wait until the exchanges opened on October 1 to find out just how much they're going to have to pay for insurance in 2014. With such dramatic hikes in premiums and out-of-pocket expenses, it's no wonder that Americans are outraged. And then, just before Thanksgiving, we learned that the Obama administration is delaying open enrollment for 2015 until after the midterm elections in November. The only American consumers this change will help are Democratic politicians who voted for Obamacare, because it will delay disclosure of some of the law's most insidious effects until after the election. Senators Barrasso, Enzi, and I introduced today the Premium Disclosure Act. We want to change the open enrollment date back to October and provide Americans notice of their premiums and cost-sharing requirements 30 days in advance so that they can plan for the future knowing their health care costs for the next year. This is a common-sense proposal that I hope my colleagues will support. As my colleague Senator Barrasso likes to say, what we know now about Obamacare is just the tip of the iceberg. Much of the media attention has focused on the disastrous rollout of the website and the 19 million Americans in the individual market. But just below the tip of the iceberg are 160 million Americans nearly 10 times more than have individual policies, who the Congressional Budget Office says get their insurance through the job, employer insurance. Think about issues like restrictive grandfathered plan rules, limits on the number of hours employees can work and be considered part-time, the mandate that employers provide government-approved insurance or pay a fine, and the millions of dollars in new taxes on health plans. All these issues will have an impact on employer-sponsored health insurance in both the public and private sector. We're already seeing that. Employers such as SeaWorld and Trader Joe's and Home Depot and other companies have publicly said they're reducing worker hours or dropping part-time employee health benefits. The chief executive of Ruby Tuesday, a restaurant company, told me last year that to implement Obamacare would be equal to the profit his company earned during the whole year. And in case you think these are isolated examples, the National Association of Manufacturers says more than 3/4 of manufacturers cited rising health care and insurance costs as the most important business challenge. The U.S. Chamber also has a membership survey saying that 74% of businesses are reporting that the health care law makes it harder for their firm to hire new workers. This is at a time when jobs are supposed to be our principal concern in our country. Many of these businesses self-insure, meaning they design and pay directly for the health plans they offer to their employees. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, more than 100 million Americans currently have an employer-sponsored health plan that's self-insured. Self-insured is a method of providing health insurance that's worked well. Since its inception in 1974, it needs to be preserved. And last month, Senators Rubio and Risch and McConnell and I introduced a bill to make sure the Obama administration doesn't change that, doesn't change the rule that allow companies to insure themselves against a medical claim that could bankrupt them. Any effort by the Obama administration to change the rule on companies that self-insure will break the president's promise to millions of Americans. It won't matter if they like their employers' health plans. They won't be able to keep them. And it's not just the private sector facing fiscal challenges because of Obamacare. Our nation's schools and colleges and universities are also being hit hard. No shortage of examples in my state, Tennessee, of local leaders dealing with Obamacare. Let's take the Franklin Special School District. It's begun limiting substitute teachers to working 4 days a week in order to avoid paying between $1 million to $4.5 million more per year in health care costs. Murray County School, south of Nashville, also limiting its substitute teachers to no more than 28 hours a week for the same reason. As one school board member told the local news, quote, "Students struggle enough having one substitute teacher, but then now we're going to have to possibly split the substitute time between 2 substitute teachers. It just makes it hard on the students to learn." Wilson County Board of Education wrote to tell me that Obamacare's reinsurance fee will cost the district an additional $165,000 this year alone. At least 9 other Tennessee school districts are reportedly limiting employee work hours or entire jobs, including Murray County, Clarksville, Rutherford County, Johnson City, Carter County, Washington County, Oneida Special School District, Scott County, Stewart County. Cumberland University in Lebanon has adopted a new policy to limit adjunct faculty to no more than 3 courses each term, meaning they won't be allowed to offer a course even if they're the most qualified instructor available. The impact of Obamacare on education is by no means limited to Tennessee. Investors Business Daily has identified well over 100 school districts and institutions of higher education nationwide that have made cuts or limited employee work hours because of Obamacare. That number is climbing daily, again suggesting this is just the tip of the iceberg. Remember, what we're hearing about today are individual policies. What we're going to hear about next year are employer policies being canceled, new costs, and there are 10 times as many Americans with employer policies as individual policies. Who pays the price for this? Our children. Cash-strapped schools simply don't have the money to absorb these costs, so they're forced to make difficult choices. For these reasons, broken promises, higher costs, fewer choices, Obamacare was a historic mistake. It expanded a health care delivery system that already cost too much and left Americans with fewer choices. Now, I said at the beginning of my remarks that I'd like to end in the same way, and I will do that with an answer to the question, what would we do if we were in charge? What if we elected a Republican Senate and even a Republican president in 2016? We would replace Obamacare, not by moving backward, but by moving in a different direction. Remember, Obamacare's real problem was it expanded a delivery system that already cost too much. What we would do instead is go step by step to introduce new ways to increase choices, to have more competition, and to lower costs, making Medicare solvent so seniors can depend on it, giving governors more flexibility with Medicaid so they can create programs with lower costs. Repeal the Obamacare wellness regulation. Senator from Missouri talked about that. Replace it with one that makes it easier, not harder, for employers to give employees lower health care costs if they live a healthy lifestyle. Let small businesses pool their resources and offer a low-cost insurance plan for their employees. The Congressional Budget Office says that Senator Enzi's bill would allow coverage for 750,000 more Americans at a lower cost if we did that. Allow families to purchase insurance across state lines. If there's a policy regulated by Kentucky, if it fits my needs and I want to buy it, why shouldn't I be able to do it if I can afford it? Expand health savings accounts. Incentivize the growth of private health insurance exchanges. That's beginning to develop all across our country, giving more choices to employees. Make it easier for patients to compare prices and quality of doctors and medical services. Incentivize states to reward junk lawsuits. Those are the steps in the right direction that we'd like to go. When Irving Kristol died not long ago, James Q. Wilson wrote a tribute in the Wall Street Journal which struck me. He said that when they began their association as neoconservatives, they were mostly Democrats, he said, we were policy skeptics. He said that was mainly what our common view was. And by that I think he must have meant that they did not believe that Washington could through a comprehensive piece of legislation, fix our whole health care system. That what Washington should do, particularly in this iPhone age, is to go step by step in a direction that gives more personal freedom to consumers, to Americans, so they can live longer, live healthier, live safer, be happier. That's what we would like to do. That's how we would like to change Obamacare. We would like to have that opportunity. So unfortunately, an unwelcome Christmas present this year for 82,000 Tennesseans is they're losing their individual policies. Even more unfortunately, an unhappy New Year is coming in which hundreds of thousands of Tennesseans will lose their employer policies, the policies that get through employers, because of Obamacare. We're ready to go in a different direction and create a way for Americans to have more choices, more competition, and insurance that they can purchase at a lower cost. I thank the President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, first of all, let me commend my friend, the Senator from Tennessee. There is no one in this body who is more thoughtful, works hard.